In 1499, a group of European explorers sailed along the coast of a land they knew almost nothing about. They had no idea they were looking at a country that would one day sit on the largest oil reserves on Earth. A country that would become one of the richest in South America, and later suffer one of the worst economic collapses in modern history. So, how did Venezuela go from oil giant to economic disaster? Let's go back 527 years. The sailors think they've found nothing of value, just another forgotten corner of the world. Then they sail into a calm bay and spot something weird. Whole villages of little wooden huts built on tall poles standing right on top of the water. People are paddling between them in canoes like the water is their street. On board is an Italian explorer named Amerigo Vespucci. And fun fact, this is the same guy America is named after. Those huts on poles remind him of a fancy city back home in Italy, full of canals, called Venice. So, half joking, he points and says this place is like a little Venice. In his language, that comes out as Venezuela. And that was that! A whole country got its name from a quick joke about some huts on sticks. I'm not kidding. Venezuela literally means Little Venice. Imagine your whole country being named because a passing tourist thought your houses looked cute. While those explorers were sailing around in wooden ships, today's sponsor lets you jump into some of the most powerful military vehicles ever built. War Thunder is a free-to-play military multiplayer action game where massive battles take place across land, sea, and air. Whether you're flying cutting-edge fighter jets, covering your allies from a helicopter, commanding heavily armored tanks, or captaining powerful warships, every battle feels large, cinematic, and packed with action. It's also a lot cheaper than financing an expedition across the Atlantic, and with much better odds of success. What really makes War Thunder stand out, though, is its incredible variety. The game features thousands of authentic military vehicles from mid-20th century to the present day, each with its own strengths, capabilities, and playstyle. Moreover, you'll have access to guided missiles, smoke screens, night vision systems, drones, and much more, giving every battle its own tactical feel. My favorite feature has to be the damage system. Instead of simple health bars, every shot actually matters. Disable enemies' tracks, knock out critical components, or watch hits play out through the game's detailed X-ray damage model. Trust me, your odds are much better than those of a 15th century explorer. One of the newest updates, Heavy Cavalry, adds brand new vehicles like the MiG-29K, M1A2C, and Leopard 2RI. TV-guided missiles alongside beautifully updated Ardennes and Ash River maps. Download War Thunder for free using the link in the description on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox. New players and anyone returning after 6 months or more will receive 100,000 Silver Lions, the exclusive Eagle of Valor decorator, and other bonuses. And if you prefer gaming on the go, be sure to check out War Thunder Mobile. Available for free on both iOS and Android using the link in the description. Now, back to our story. The funny thing is, people had been living on these islands for thousands of years before that ship ever showed up. They had their own towns, their own kings, their own way of life. The Spanish weren't here to enjoy the view. They wanted treasure. And for a few years, they thought they'd struck it big, because the little islands just offshore were packed with oysters full of pearls. These were some of the richest pearl beds in the whole world. So they went pearl crazy. They forced local divers down into the water again and again to rip pearls from the seabed, and they worked huge numbers of them to death. It was cruel, and it was fast. Within a few decades, the oyster beds were stripped bare, and the boom was over. With the pearls gone, and not a speck of gold in sight, Spain took one more look at this hot, buggy coast, and basically said, meh, not worth the trouble. So, the most powerful empire on Earth gave up on Venezuela almost before it began. And that set up one of the strangest deals in the whole history of colonies. Because far away in Europe, the King of Spain had a huge, embarrassing problem. He owed a mountain of money, and to pay it back, he was about to do something no king had ever tried. he was going to hand this entire land over to a bank. Meet Charles V. In the 1520s, he is the most powerful man in Europe. He's the King of Spain and the Holy Roman Emperor, so he rules a giant slice of the continent. He's got armies, palaces, and crowns coming out of his ears. He's also got one big problem. He's broke. Running an empire is really expensive. Armies and wars and giant palaces all cost a fortune, so Charles had borrowed mountains of cash from a rich German banking family called the Welsers. And now, the Welsers wanted their money back.
Your Majesty, about the money you owe us.
Ah, yes, about that. I don't actually have it right now.
You said that last year.
And I stand by it.
Sire, with interest, the total now comes to... Oh, actually, may I sit down first?
Oh, that bad?
I've started writing the number across 2 pages. Then perhaps a country instead.
Take Venezuela. Nobody's using it.
Is it nice?
It's, warm.
And just like that, in 1528, a whole country got handed to a bank to pay off a debt. German bosses now ran the place. Most people have no idea Venezuela was once basically a German colony, but it really was. The Germans showed up with one giant dream stuck in their heads: El Dorado. The legend said there was a hidden city deep in the jungle, made of solid gold, ruled by a king who covered himself head to toe in gold dust every single day. Find that city, and you'd be richer than anyone alive. So the Germans marched army after army into the wild to hunt for it. And the jungle absolutely wrecked them. The heat, the swamps, the diseases, the arrows from people who really did not want to be invaded, their leaders dropped dead one after another. Did they ever find the Golden City, you ask? No, because, spoiler, it didn't exist. They suffered and died for almost 20 years chasing a fairy tale, and they had nothing to show for it but graves. The last German leader finally stumbled back out of the jungle, half-starved and empty-handed, only to find that a Spanish enemy had grabbed power while he was away. Did the Spanish guy throw him a welcome party? Not quite. He had the German leader's head chopped clean off instead. Basically the same? Yikes! With that, the German adventure was over. Spain quietly took Venezuela back and made a very familiar choice. They would just ignore it again. And ignore it they did, for the next 250 years. But while nobody important was looking, something was quietly growing on that coast. Something brown, something sweet, and something about to make a handful of families ridiculously rich. That something was chocolate. Well, almost. It was cacao, the bean you need to make chocolate, and Venezuela's warm, wet coast grew some of the best cacao on the planet. Over in Europe, rich people had gone completely mad for hot chocolate, and they would pay silly money for it. But to see why that mattered so much, you have to picture how sleepy and forgotten Venezuela had become. For all of that time, Spain treated this place like a dusty back room of a mansion. The real prize was over in Mexico and Peru, where whole mountains of silver came pouring out of the ground. Venezuela had no silver mountain, so no important person wanted anything to do with it. Then, cacao flipped the whole story. A few local families planted enormous farms along the coast and got rich selling chocolate to the world. People nicknamed them the Grandes Cacaos, which basically means the big chocolate guys. And here's a fun one. Venezuelans still use that exact phrase today to mean a powerful big shot. But that wealth had a very dark side. The farms ran on the forced labor of enslaved Africans, shipped across the ocean in huge numbers and worked half to death. Those fancy chocolate fortunes were built on terrible suffering. Now here's the bit that quietly lit the fuse for everything to come. These rich cacao families had been born in Venezuela, and Spain looked down on them for it. The best jobs, the governor's seat, the real power, all of it was saved for men sent fresh from Spain. If you were born in the colony, it didn't matter how rich or how clever you were always treated as second best. Imagine that for a second. You own half the coast. You've read every clever book in Europe, and some official who just stepped off a boat gets to boss you around, purely because of where you happen to be born. Honestly, I'd be pretty annoyed too. It drove the rich locals up the wall. You had a whole class of proud, wealthy, smart men who were sick to death of taking orders from a faraway king who had never once set foot in their country. All they needed was one good excuse to throw off Spain and run things themselves. And one day, that excuse arrived in the strangest way you could imagine. It didn't come from anyone in the Americas. It came from a short, fierce Frenchman called Napoleon. In 1808, Napoleon stormed into Spain, kicked the Spanish king off his throne, and plopped his own brother on it instead. Suddenly, the colonies had a real head-scratcher. If there's no proper king in Spain, then who exactly were they supposed to be obeying? The proud people of Caracas spotted their chance. In 1810, they politely showed the Spanish governor the door. And in 1811, they went all in and declared full independence. A brand new country was born. There was just one problem. The new little republic was broke, shaky, and barely held together. And then, as if the sky itself had an opinion, disaster hit. On a holy day in March 1812, a gigantic earthquake tore through Venezuela. In a matter of seconds, it flattened Caracas and other rebel cities, burying thousands of people under the rubble. And the weird thing is, the quake smashed the rebel towns the hardest, while many of the towns still loyal to Spain were left standing. Priests on the king's side pointed at the wreckage and shouted that God was punishing the rebels for turning against Spain. Terrified survivors believed them, and the First Republic crumbled. This is where our hero walks in, Simón Bolívar, a seriously rich young man from Caracas who took one look at his broken country and basically said, "Not on my watch." Bolívar poured his entire fortune into the fight for freedom, and he never gave up. He won battles, he lost battles, he got chased out of the country, and every single time he came roaring back. The man just would not quit. But the Spanish kept beating him in the obvious places. So in 1819, Bolívar cooked up a plan so crazy, it might just work. Instead of attacking where the enemy expected, he would march his worn-out army straight up and over the freezing peaks of the Andes, the tallest mountains in the Americas, and smash the Spanish from behind.
Sir, our men are freezing to death up here. This is total madness.
Of course it is. That's exactly why the Spanish will never see us coming.
Sir, I can't feel my hands.
Excellent. Then you won't feel the sword either.
That's less comforting than you think, sir.
Look around you, gentlemen. What do you see?
Ice? Clouds? My breakfast from earlier?
I see a road no Spaniard would ever dream of guarding.
With respect, sir, there's a reason for that.
Keep climbing.
It was savage. Many men froze to death on those icy slopes. But it worked. I still can't believe it worked. Bolívar's half-dead army came pouring down out of the mountains and crashed into the stunned Spanish, who never dreamed of an attack coming from that direction. The enemy fell apart. By 1821, after years of fighting, Venezuela was finally and truly free. And Bolívar was just getting warmed up. He marched on and helped free 5 more countries from Spanish rule. An entire nation, Bolivia, is named in his honor. But Bolívar had one giant dream left in him, and that dream was about to break his heart. The dream was a single giant country. Bolívar didn't just want to free Venezuela, he wanted to glue Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, and Ecuador into one enormous supernation called Gran Colombia. On the map, it looked like a giant, one of the biggest countries on Earth. On paper, beautiful. In real life, a nightmare to run. The pieces were huge, far apart, and packed with proud people who didn't want to share. Back then, there were no phones and no trains. A single message could take weeks to crawl across the mountains because it was normally a guy on a donkey carrying it over. trying to govern all of it from one spot was like trying to steer 10 horses galloping in 10 different directions. And every region had its own tough local strongman who thought he was the real boss. The toughest one in Venezuela was a man named Jose Antonio Paez. Paez was quite the character. He'd grown up poor on the wild grassy plains, wrestling cattle and fighting on horseback with a long lance. His rough plainsmen, called llaneros, would follow him absolutely anywhere. He had the muscle and the loyal men, and zero interest in taking orders from far-off Bogota. So in 1830, Paez simply pulled Venezuela out of the Union. And just like that, Bolívar's giant dream cracked apart. All those years of fighting and his big idea fell to bits in a single year. It broke the great man completely. That same year, sick and worn out and heartbroken, Simón Bolívar died. Near the end, he said a line people still quote today. He said that trying to bring order to the region was like plowing the sea, meaning a total waste of effort. But here's the thing Bolívar accidentally left behind, and it's huge. He had taught the whole country a dangerous lesson, that the man with the biggest army gets to make the rules. Forget elections, forget laws. Whoever had the most soldiers and the toughest horsemen simply took charge. So for the next 100 years or so, Venezuela was ruled by a long parade of these strong men on horseback. People called them caudillos. One would grab power, hold it for a while, then get shoved out by the next tough guy with an even bigger army. Round and round it went. In some stretches, the country burned through ruler after ruler, each one booted out the moment a stronger rival rode into town. It was shaky, it was rough, and it kept the country dirt poor. And it was about to blow up into a war so bloody, it would swallow a huge slice of the entire population. That war was called the Federal War. And to get it, you have to know what people were so mad about. It came down to land. A tiny number of rich families owned almost everything, while millions of ordinary Venezuelans had nothing and worked that land for scraps. After decades of broken promises, the poor had finally had enough. In 1859, the whole thing erupted. Rebel armies swept across the countryside behind a battle cry that made rich landowners turn pale. Land and free men. It meant just what it sounds like. Take the land, free the people. The fighting dragged on for years, and it was nasty. But what's really grim is that most people who died never even saw a battlefield. As the armies marched back and forth, they burned farms and wrecked the food supply. So hunger and disease ended up doing most of the killing. The country was basically eating itself alive.
Great news, sir. We've taken the valley. Wonderful. And the harvest? Burned. All of it. So, we won a valley with nothing left to eat. Brilliant.
Sir, urgent news! The enemy has taken the next valley over!
And let me guess, they burned that harvest too, huh?
No, sir. We burned that one on the way out.
Of course we did. Should we take it back? What for? There's nothing left in it to win.
By the time the dust settled around 1863, roughly 100,000 people were dead. And back then, Venezuela had just over 1 million people in total. That is close to 1 in every 10 Venezuelans gone. Imagine a war totally wiping out 1 in 10 people you know. Whole towns simply emptied out, and farms that had fed families for generations were left as ash. So, after all that blood and hunger, the poor finally got their fair share, right? Nope. Once the smoke cleared, a slick new strongman named Antonio Guzman Blanco grabbed the top job. This guy was so in love with himself that he gave himself the nickname the Illustrious American, ordered statues of his own face all over the country, and even set up public holidays to celebrate, well, himself. Humble, right? He ruled like a king in everything but the crown. For most ordinary people, though, life carried on exactly as before. Same poverty and the same bosses, just a fancier mustache at the top. The sad truth is, all those years of war swapped the bosses, but changed nothing for regular people. Venezuela was still poor, still run by whoever held the guns, and still going nowhere fast. It honestly looked like this country was doomed to stay broke and chaotic forever. But deep under a muddy lake in the west, a black, sticky secret was waiting. And it was about to flip Venezuela's entire future upside down. That black, sticky secret was oil. Tons of it, sitting right under Lake Maracaibo. But before we get to the moment it erupted, let's meet the man who happened to be in charge when it did. In 1908, a quiet, cruel general named Juan Vincent Gomez seized power. Gomez trusted almost nobody and barely gave a single speech. He ran the country with an iron fist. Spies everywhere, enemies thrown in prison. Under him, Venezuela was still sleepy. Mostly just farms and small towns, still nobody's idea of important. Then came the morning of December 14th, 1922. A drilling crew was poking around near Lake Maracaibo at a well called Boroso No. 2. And the well blew its top. A black fountain of oil shot more than 100 feet into the sky. It blasted out at around 100,000 barrels a day, and nobody could switch it off. For 9 straight days, oil ran down and coated everything for miles in thick black goo. Yes, 9 whole days of raining oil. When word spread, the world's biggest oil companies all had the same thought at the exact same time. Get to Venezuela and get there fast. Foreign oil men came flooding in, waving fat contracts, and Gomez was more than happy to hand out the drilling rigs. He signed deal after deal with the foreign companies, and he made very sure he took the biggest personal cut from every single one of them. Money came gushing in even faster than the oil, and the change to Venezuela was amazing. A country that had been broke and forgotten for centuries was suddenly swimming in cash. By the late 1920s, Venezuela was selling more oil than any other country on Earth. Tiny Venezuela was now pumping fuel to the whole world. And Gomez did something almost no ruler ever does. He used the oil money to pay off the country's entire national debt. Every last coin Venezuela owed to other nations wiped out. The country didn't owe anybody anything. That basically never happens. Of course, he also stole a huge fortune for himself and his friends and crushed anyone who dared complain. But after ruling for 27 long years, this tough old dictator did something very unusual for a Venezuelan strongman. He wasn't shot, exiled, or overthrown. He simply died quietly in his own bed in 1935. So, Venezuela was now rich. Wildly, almost unbelievably rich. And for a while, it really did look like the country might finally turn into paradise. Paradise, it turned out, was complicated. When Gomez died in 1935, Venezuela had the one thing everyone dreams of: money. But it was still missing something huge: a say in who ran the place. The oil cash kept flowing, but so did the dictators. More strongmen came and went, and the people kept demanding real elections and a real voice. In 1958, they finally got it. The latest dictator was chased out of the country, and the main political groups did something rare and clever. Instead of fighting each other over the throne like always, they signed a deal to share power peacefully and settle things with fair elections. For the very first time, regular people got to vote for their own leaders. Real democracy at last. And it was floating on an ocean of oil. Then, in 1973, the jackpot hit. A war broke out in the Middle East, and oil prices suddenly shot through the roof. Venezuela, sitting on tankers full of the stuff, got incredibly rich almost overnight. So much money poured in that the government honestly struggled to spend it all. People started calling the country Saudi Venezuela, after the famous oil giant Saudi Arabia. And get this, for a while, Venezuelans were the richest people in all of Latin America, richer than every neighbor around them. For such a small country, Venezuela was a giant in the oil world. It had even helped start OPEC, the famous club of oil nations, back in 1960. When it came to oil, the whole world had to listen. They became famous for flying up to Miami on huge shopping sprees and buying everything in sight. They'd point to things and say, "Dame dos," which means, "Give me two." 2 TVs, 2 of everything, just because they could. Why not? Oil would pay for all of it.
I'll take that television. And that one too. Dame dos.
Sir, that's your 5th pair of everything.
Then make it a 6th. Venezuela's buying.
Darling, will it fit on the plane?
We'll buy 2 planes.
Who are these people? Venezuelans, sir. They come every weekend. Then why are you standing here talking to me? Get more televisions.
Ooh, do those refrigerators come in gold?
For you, ma'am, they do now. Feeling on top of the world, the government decided to take full control of its oil in 1976. It pushed out the foreign companies and built one giant state-owned oil company to run the whole show. It felt like a golden age that would last forever, but the entire party was balanced on one shaky leg. The whole country now depended on a single thing staying high: the price of oil. And oil prices, as Venezuela was about to learn the hard way, do not stay high forever. When they dropped, the dream curdled into a nightmare with terrifying speed. In the 1980s, the price of oil collapsed, and the country that had spent like there was no tomorrow suddenly couldn't pay the bills. The magic money dried up, prices in the shops shot up, and millions of Venezuelans who had felt rich just a few years earlier were now struggling to put food on the table. The fall was head-spinning. In 1989, the government tried to fix the mess by raising prices on basic things, including the bus fares poor people needed just to get to work. The capital city absolutely exploded. Furious crowds poured into the streets of Caracas. For days, people rioted and looted in an explosion of rage that became known as the Caracazón. The army was sent in to crush it, and they did. Hundreds were killed, maybe far more. Nobody knows the true number to this day. The whole country was left in shock, and the Golden Party felt well and truly over. Watching all of this with a burning anger was a young army officer named Hugo Chavez. Funnily enough, his big childhood dream had been to become a baseball star, not a soldier. But he looked hard at the rich, broken, crooked system and decided the whole thing needed to be ripped down and built from scratch. So in 1992, Chavez gathered a group of loyal soldiers and tried to overthrow the government by force. An actual military coup. It failed. Fast. Chavez was captured within hours. Game over, you'd think. But then, the government made one fascinating mistake. They let him go on live television to tell his remaining fighters to give up and stop the bloodshed.
We interrupt this broadcast. The captured coup leader will now address the nation. Good. Let the whole country watch him surrender. Comrades, lay down your weapons. For now, the goals we set were not achieved.
Wait, for now?
What does he mean, for now?
He said it very calmly, too.
Cut the feed! Cut the feed! Sir, it already went out live.
We like this guy.
We're going to regret those 2 seconds of television.
Those 2 little words, for now, lit a fire across the entire country. Here was a man who had just tried to topple the government, failed, and gotten himself arrested, and yet, by sounding calm, brave, and completely unfinished, he turned into an overnight hero. To millions of poor, angry Venezuelans who hated the system, Chavez suddenly looked like the one guy who might actually fight for them. He was hauled off to prison for his little rebellion, but he was now the most famous man in the whole country. 6 years later, that same failed coup leader wouldn't need a single soldier or gun to take charge of Venezuela. He would simply walk up and let the people hand it to him. In 1998, that is exactly what happened. Hugo Chavez ran for president, promising to grab the country back from the rich and hand it to the poor. And he won, massively. The old political parties that had run things for decades were wiped out. Chavez was now in charge of the most oil-rich country in the Americas. And lucky for him, oil prices were climbing again. At first, everything looked golden. Chavez took the flood of oil money and poured it straight into the poor neighborhoods. Cheap food and new clinics staffed by doctors brought over from Cuba. Free reading classes for grown-ups who had never had the chance to learn. Millions of people who had been ignored their whole lives finally felt like the government saw them. They loved him for it. He was larger than life. He had his own TV show where he'd sing songs and talk for hours on end. He renamed the country Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, after his great hero, Simón Bolívar. He even survived a coup attempt against him in 2002, getting tossed out of power, and then sweeping right back into office 2 days later, carried by huge crowds demanding his return. But under all the show, there was a deep problem. The whole thing ran on just two things: sky-high oil prices and Chavez himself. He spent every dollar that came in, then borrowed more on top. He frightened away the private businesses that made and grew everything else, so the country slowly stopped producing much of anything besides oil. Then, in 2013, Hugo Chavez died of cancer. He handed the country to his loyal right-hand man, a former bus driver named Nicolás Maduro. And almost immediately, the floor gave way. Oil prices crashed again, and with nothing else holding the economy up, the whole thing collapsed right along with it. Prices began rising so fast that money lost its value by the hour. Shops themselves went bare, hospitals ran out of basic medicine, people started going hungry and losing weight, a grim thing so common it earned a bitter nickname: the Maduro diet. How bad did the money get? This part is almost hard to believe. Prices rose so insanely fast that inflation hit 1,000,000%. Shops gave up counting cash and started weighing it on scales instead, because a stack of bills was worth more by weight than by its number. A fat bundle of money could barely buy a loaf of bread. And so, staring at empty plates and no future at all, Venezuelans began doing the unthinkable. They started packing up and leaving the only home they'd ever known, carrying whatever they could hold. At first, it was a trickle, then it became a flood. Around 7.7 million people, roughly a quarter of the entire country, packed up and left. Let that number sink in. 1 in every 4 Venezuelans gone. It is one of the biggest movements of people happening anywhere on Earth right now. And most of them couldn't afford a plane ticket or even a bus, so they walked. Over freezing mountain passes high in the Andes, across rivers for hundreds of miles, often with little kids riding on their shoulders. Whole families sold everything they owned just to get out the door. Meanwhile, Nicolás Maduro clung to power with both hands. In 2024, he held a presidential election, and by the vote counts almost everyone in the world trusts, he lost it. Badly. So he simply announced that he had won anyway. The man who had actually got the votes had to flee the country for his own safety. To yank everyone's attention away from the mess, Maduro reached for an old trick: pick a fight with the neighbors. He held a vote to grab a giant oil-rich slice of the country next door, Guyana. The region is called Essequibo, and it makes up about 2/3 of that entire nation.
The Essequibo is ours now! Put it on the map!
You can't just grab most of our country.
We just did! Anyone going to stop us?
So, do I actually redraw the border, or
Yes, take your pen. Make it look official.
Don't you dare touch that pen. Hey, let's all calm down, alright?
Stay out of it. This is between me and 2/3 of Guyana.
You see? You see what I'm dealing with? I'll just, do it in pencil for now. And then came the twist that nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, saw coming. In the early hours of January 2026, American forces struck Venezuela. They knocked out its defenses, stormed into the capital, and grabbed Maduro himself. Then they flew him out of the country to stand trial in a courtroom all the way over in New York. His own vice president was quickly sworn in to take charge of the wreckage he left behind. Just think about how insane that is. The sitting leader of a giant oil power snatched in the dark and hauled across the sea to face a foreign judge. Nothing quite like that has happened in a very, very long time. So, where does all this leave Venezuela today? It is still sitting on the biggest pool of oil on the planet, the very same black gold that once made it the richest country around. But a quarter of its people are scattered across the world, its strongman is locked in a cell overseas, and nobody can say who will truly run the place next, or whether the chaos is finally ending, or simply changing its shape. But if you thought the story of Venezuela is crazy, wait until you hear about the most brutal wars in history. It's gonna blow your mind. Click here to watch that video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you there.